They didn't just tag a boat. They spray-painted a gravestone I was still grieving over, and they did it while I was asleep 10 feet away. I woke up in the cabin berth around 6, the air inside still cool, still quiet, until something sharp and chemical burned my nose. I stepped out onto the dock in my socks, still half in a dream, and then I saw it. 8-inch neon orange letters screaming boat, trash across 40 feet of spotless white fiberglass, paint sliding down the hull of my dead uncle's cruiser like radioactive tears, like someone had taken a highlighter to a ghost, the can still lying on the planks, hissing out its last breath like it wanted to be caught. That boat had ridden out 3 decades of mountain windstorms without a scratch, but one entitled hand with a spray can turn it into a billboard of humiliation you could read from every deck around Cedarwind Lake. And when I touched it, the paint smeared onto my fingers, bright and sticky and stubborn, like guilt I couldn't wash off. Then I saw the notice, duct-taped right to the windshield, official letterhead from the Cedarwind Shores Association, signed by their president, Veronica Alder, ordering me to move my boat within 72 hours because it created unsightly ripples, threatening $500 a day in fines if I didn't obey. Unsightly ripples. My name is Oliver Grayson, 52, retired Navy logistics officer. I spent 20 years keeping carriers fueled and fed across 3 oceans, tracking storms and supply lines, and people who shot at us from the dark. And somehow the thing that really made my hands shake was orange paint on my uncle's boat. Before all this, I was rotting in a cramped apartment in San Diego after a divorce that split more than furniture, watching my 15-year-old daughter Mia sink into her phone every other weekend, while we pretended we both weren't counting the hours. Then Uncle Harold Lane, my family's black sheep legend, died at 89 and left me his cabin and water rights at Cedarwind Lake up in the Sierra Crest Range. The only man who ever told me I wasn't a disappointment. His place felt like stepping into a sepia photograph. Thick log walls, a stone fireplace that still smelled faintly of smoke and pine resin, a wraparound porch polished by 40 winters of boots and snow. All of it paid off long ago. No mortgage, no debt. Just quiet and trees, and the soft slap of water against the dock he'd carved by hand. The lake itself looked like something a painter made up. 300 acres of clear water wedged between dark green slopes. Trout hovering 30 feet down like silver ghosts. 47 houses spaced along the shoreline. Manicured lawns, spotless decks. Imported SUVs and European sedans parked like trophies in front of glass boxes. And sitting over all that, like a queen on a chessboard that didn't belong to her, was Veronica Alder, HOA president for life of the Cedarwind Shores Association, former corporate HR solutions director, now self-appointed guardian of community standards, ruling from a 2-story glass fortress directly across from my uncle's old cabin. Her white Lexus GX parked in a perfect half-circle driveway that never seemed to know what dust was. The neighbors whispered, even when they thought they were just gossiping, about how she walked around with a clipboard like a weapon, how she'd issued over 100 violation notices in 2 years, how she measured lawn height with an actual ruler, timed dog walkers with a stopwatch, photographed trash cans that came out 5 minutes too early. 2 families had already sold and fled rather than keep paying for her control issues. I met her in person during my 2nd week there, 7 in the morning, mug of coffee in my hand, sunrise turning the mountains gold and the lake pink, when her heels started clicking along my dock, each step sounding like a countdown timer, her perfume hitting me a second before she did, sugary and sharp, wrong in the cold clean air. Your vessel is disrupting the visual serenity of our shoreline, Veronica said, lifting her clipboard like she was serving me a subpoena. The ripples, the age of the craft, the noise, it doesn't align with the aesthetic guidelines of Cedarwind Shores. I glanced at my uncle's 1980s cruiser, worn but polished, old-school lines, the kind of boat you respect even if you don't understand it, sitting there between pontoon yachts and gleaming toys that cost more than my Navy pension. Ma'am, I said, calm as I could. It's registered, insured, and tied to a dock that's been here longer than half these houses. I'm not breaking any laws. She smiled, tight and practiced, the kind of smile they teach you in HR seminars about difficult conversations, and said, we'll see about that. She kept her promise. Day 10, certified violation notice. Day 15, letter from a firm called Suburban Compliance Legal Group, hinting at escalating remedies. Day 20, anonymous complaint to the county saying I was running an unlicensed commercial charter. Day 25, a petition signed by 12 neighbors claiming my wake and engine noise destroyed their quality of life. And then, when the harassment and paperwork didn't make me fold, they came for the boat itself. And that's when this stopped being annoying and started being war. After the paint and the petition and the whisper campaign, something in me clicked back into deployment mode, that quiet part of my brain that says, fine, if this is a battle, we'll run it like an operation. So I did what the Navy trained me to do. I gathered intel. First stop was the county courthouse, that special kind of building that smells like old paper, tired coffee, and lost arguments. I spent 6 hours hunched over records, flipping through HOA covenants and land transfers, reading line after line of grass height rules and approved paint colors and bizarre minutiae about mailbox shapes. All the little ways petty people dress up control as community care, until, buried in Section 12 of the original documents, I saw a phrase about original shoreline grantors retaining certain riparian rights, and I felt a little jolt in my gut. Back at the cabin, I upgraded my defenses the way we used to harden supply ships, for weatherproof cameras with night vision watching the dock and shoreline, motion-sensing lights wired to backup batteries, off-site cloud backup that no one with a ladder and a screwdriver could erase. My phone became not just a phone but a recorder, a file cabinet, a weapon. Deputy Aaron Blake, a cop who looked like he'd seen more real trouble than barking dogs and loud music, took my vandalism report like it mattered, photographed every streak of orange, bag paint chips, and muttered, "These HOA types are getting bolder than gangbangers," as he wrote. Then, in my uncle's basement, surrounded by boxes that smelled like oil, dust, and old rain, I found the game changer. A cardboard box, labeled in Uncle Harold's careful, looping script, lake and land papers. Inside were manila folders layered like tree rings, tax statements, survey plats, letters from agencies that no longer exist, and in the middle, yellowed and brittle, a deed dated 1920, signed by Franklin Lane, my great-great-grandfather. The words were dense and old-fashioned, but some terms hit me like a flare in the dark: artificial reservoir, exclusive ownership of lake bed, perpetual water usage rights, to heirs and assigns forever. I had to read it 3 times before my brain would accept what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't a natural lake developers had wrapped a subdivision around. This was a reservoir carved into the valley by my ancestor for his timber company, later passed down the family tree, until it landed in Uncle Harold's hands, and then mine. If those documents still held up, then the Cedarwind Shores Association didn't own the lake at all. They'd just been acting like it. I scanned everything and emailed it to Lauren Park, a local property attorney known for grilling overreaching HOAs like they were cheap burgers. We got on a video call, papers spread across her desk like battle plans. "Oliver," she said, tapping one paragraph with a pen, "you don't just have a strong position here. You have the legal equivalent of a nuclear arsenal. These rights were never conveyed to the developer, never surrendered, never extinguished. It all still sits with you." That's when the scope of it sank in. For nearly 40 years, the developer who built out Cedarwind Shores and the HOA that followed had been acting under an assumption, not a right. They'd been charging lake maintenance fees, writing rules about docks and boats, threatening fines over access. On an artificial lake their paperwork never actually bought. Meanwhile, Veronica cranked the pressure. She pushed a $5,000 emergency environmental assessment to fund legal action against a dangerous vessel, Circula. Ted Flyers, comparing my diesel engine to an oil spill, hired a so-called marine expert, who turned out to be her brother-in-law from a kayak rental shop, to scribble a report on napkins, claiming my 25-foot boat somehow caused more shoreline erosion than 35-foot speedboats. She launched a social media crusade, Save Cedarwind, posting sunset photos and framing me as an outsider polluting their lake, dropping phrases like undesirable elements and threat to property values thinly veiled enough to fool no one with a conscience. At the same time, my quiet resistance grew. People started approaching me in driveways and grocery aisles like undercover informants. Helen Porter, retired teacher, whispered that she'd paid 15 grand in fines over tomato plants and unauthorized bird feeders. Rob Vega, a Vietnam vet, told me about his $2,000 penalty for the wrong mailbox shade, complete with a color wheel inspection. Artist Erin Caldwell and her husband Mark showed me photos of Veronica measuring their garden fence with a tape measure like she was checking prison bars. They all had paperwork, screenshots, letters, and they'd all been terrified to fight her alone. While Lauren dug deeper, hiring a title researcher and a surveyor, Veronica escalated again, filing formal complaints with environmental agencies, clogging my boat's engine intake with trash to cause sabotage, cutting power to my dock cameras during a storm by slicing wiring at the junction box. All of it documented, backed up, cataloged. Water testing from an independent lab came back sparkling clean for my section of the lake, but flagged several shoreline septic systems, owned by some of her staunchest allies, as dangerously close to violation levels. The scientist we brought in, a PhD hydrologist, wrote a report so thorough it shredded every fiction her little propaganda club had posted online. Then the big hammer dropped. Suburban Compliance Legal Group sent a demand letter on behalf of the Cedarwind Shores Association for immediate removal of my boat, threatening a $100,000 lawsuit for lost property values and environmental damage. They even tried to slap a lien on Uncle Harold's cabin for unpaid emergency assessments I'd never agreed to, assuming, I guess, that a retired guy living alone would panic and fold. Instead, I handed everything to Lauren, who filed for an injunction to freeze their actions and quietly prepared something much more devastating. While I walked the shoreline of what I was now almost sure was legally my private reservoir, breathing in cold air and pine, and the very specific satisfaction of knowing the bully had no idea she'd picked a fight on someone else's battlefield. And then Lauren's researcher finished the title work, laid out a clean chain from Franklin Lane to modern day. The surveyor staked out where my property extended into the water, showing that half the community docks, plus Veronica's little glass-roofed meditation gazebo, sat squarely on land owned by the same man she kept calling a problem resident. That's when the strategy shifted from defense to full-scale counterattack. The night it all came to a head. The meeting hall off the main road was over capacity, 60-plus residents squeezed into fold-out chairs, the murmur of nervous voices bouncing off beige walls. Deputy Blake posted quietly in the back because Veronica had told him she feared military aggression. A local reporter, Chloe Barrett, setting up her camera after getting an anonymous tip about a lake rights showdown. Veronica stood at the front beside a projector, flanked by board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, opening with a speech about crisis, safety, community peace, then clicking through slide after slide of my boat shot from angles that made it look like an invading warship, charts correlating my wake with made-up erosion patterns, testimonials from her three most loyal allies about sleepless nights and mental anguish. Her big finale was an emergency motion to ban my boat permanently, levy $15,000 in restoration fees, and authorize more legal action if I didn't comply. She asked for a vote. Before she could get to the all in favor, I raised my hand and, as calmly as I could, asked for 10 minutes to respond. Lauren already moving down the aisles, handing out copies of key documents, my laptop ready at the projector. We dimmed the lights. The room went quiet, and on the screen appeared a blown-up scan of the 1920 deed from Franklin Lane, the one granting exclusive ownership of the reservoir and its bed to heirs and assigns forever. Then the 1923 follow-up, reserving all water rights even as pieces of shoreline land were sold. Everyone, I said, feeling my voice steady as the words lined up, I don't just have permission to use this water. Legally speaking, my family created this lake, and the rights to every drop, every inch of lakebed, have passed down to me. You could actually hear the silence, a kind of pressure in the air, as Lauren clicked to the next slide. The modern survey, bright lines tracing property boundaries, highlighting every dock, every platform, every ladder and gazebo sitting on what the county, the title office, and the law now agreed was land and water owned by one person. Me. For 38 years, the Cedarwind Shores Association had been charging nearly $900,000 in lake maintenance fees on property that wasn't theirs, writing rules over surfaces they didn't own, threatening fines and lawsuits on water they had no legal right to regulate. The color drained from faces, then flushed back, anger and panic mixing across the room. Veronica sputtering about prescriptive rights and forgeries, Deputy Blake leaning a little forward as voices rose. When the noise started to swell, I stood fully, took a breath, and laid out the choice as simply as I could. I said, tomorrow, demand the removal of every structure on my water, file trespass suits against 47 households, shut down access, and sue this HOA out of existence, and the law, as it stands right now, would be on my side. I let that sink in, watched people picture losing their docks, their views, their easy swims. Or, I continued, we acknowledge what the paperwork actually says, we stop pretending this association owns something it never bought, and we sign a licensing agreement, $50 a year per household, for continued access. All docks stay, swim platforms stay, boat launches stay, kids keep jumping off the ladders, but the harassment ends, the vandalism stops, and Veronica steps down from this position she's been abusing for years. Lauren added the final terms, settlement of $50,000 to cover my damages and legal costs, a no-contact clause, and a written commitment that the HOA would never again attempt to regulate the lake without my consent. The vote wasn't even close. Within 2 weeks, Veronica Alder and her 3 most loyal enforcers had for sale signs out front, their houses on the market before the next board meeting. Word spreading that the president who'd measured people's grass to the millimeter had been trespassing on someone else's water the whole time. Property values didn't crash the way she'd always threatened whenever anyone questioned her. They climbed, buyers eager to live at a lake where the rules were reasonable and nobody's happiness depended on not angering a woman with a clipboard. Under the new president, Helen Porter, dues dropped by 40%, 80-plus petty violation categories were wiped off the books. Guidelines rewritten in plain language that sounded like neighbors talking instead of prosecutors accusing. The Cedarwind Shores Association went from a weapon to a tool, and for the first time since I moved there, people looked relaxed walking their dogs. My licensing fees from the lake helped fund the Lane, Grayson Conservation Scholarship, $5,000 a year for students studying environmental science or property law, kids who wanted to protect places like Cedarwind Lake without turning them into little dictatorships. The case Lauren wrote up became a model in legal journals, cited in courtrooms across the state, pushing through the statewide Community Oversight Act that forced HOAs to prove authority before regulating things they didn't own. As for Veronica, last I heard, she'd moved to a gated development called Sunridge Palms in Arizona and immediately started racking up fines for wind chimes, pool equipment, and a patio umbrella that clashed with desert aesthetic guidelines. The enforcer turned into the enforced, learning firsthand what it feels like when someone else's arbitrary taste controls your life. These days, my mornings are simple. I sit on the same dock my uncle built, watch the sun catch the mist on water that legally belongs to me, but emotionally belongs to E. Very person here who just wants to live without being terrorized over lawn length. Listen to kids laughing instead of complaints being filed. Feel the boat rocking gently under my hand. No orange paint, just clean white hull, and a small American flag at the stern that doesn't feel like provocation anymore. Just a quiet statement that rights are worth defending. Uncle Harold's legacy didn't die under neon letters. It turned into the weapon that freed an entire community, and somehow, that feels like the ending he would have written himself. And now I can't help wondering, and I'm curious what you think too. When someone abuses power so badly, when they vandalize your family's memory and try to crush you with fake authority, how far is it fair to go when you finally have all the power in your hands? At what point does justice turn into revenge?